You're saying that a hormone that a woman produces her whole life in a huge abundance isn't safe until that woman is suffering so badly in menopause that, okay, then we'll give you some, but just enough to get rid of those outward symptoms like hot flashes or vaginal dryness, or, that's the, okay, we'll treat that. And that is not the way to go about it. We start losing hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, 10 years before we hit menopause. And so we're telling women, you have to wait, when perimenopause is 10 plus years for most women. It's like, no, you can't have this. We'll give you an antidepressant. We'll give you birth control pills. We'll give you sleeping pills to manage these symptoms. Then once you're in menopause, we can give you estrogen, which would just fix everything, And it's like, it just drives me mad.
Karen Martel, it is such a joy. I think it's the only way I can describe it, to have you back here on the show today. Second time guest. I think it was a while ago, the last time we recorded together. We've just been chatting offline for quite some time before we've come on. And I think there was just so much good stuff that you shared there. I can't wait for the listeners to hear all about it. So welcome back. Welcome back, Karen.
Thanks for having me back. And it was really great to meet you in person last year. You were one of the ones that we both spoke, so everyone can hear. We both spoke at Dragonfly event down in Denver, Colorado. We both flew down for it. And when I saw the roster of people that were coming to speak, you were the one that was top of my list, where I was like, oh, Angela's coming. I get to meet Angela in person. This is so excellent. Because we're on the other side of the world from each other, it was such an opportunity. And I was so excited that you were coming. So I was so happy to meet you in person. And that's when we were like, let's do another podcast together. We gotta do this again. Because it's been several years.
It has been several years. And like you, I was literally so excited to see you and Molly and Danielle and all of them, because I get to see you through screens and things, but never in person. So it was just amazing. Yeah, I think it was, I'm not sure whether it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but your business has exploded since then. I think it's fair to say. So much going on with the launch of your new product line, just the growth in your podcast and everything. So it's amazing. So we're going to dig deep on hormones and questions that don't get answered, because I've talked a lot about hormones on this podcast with various guests, but I think there are some topics that are really quite detailed and that we haven't really touched on. And you and I were talking about them earlier. So one of the things I'd like to kick off with is estrogen, or estrogen, as you call it.
Oh,
I prefer the spelling of estrogen, can I just say, with an E.
And then you guys also say the menopause, not menopause, right?
Yes,
the
that's
menopause.
True. The menopause. Yes, we do.
Yep.
Indeed. So looking at estrogen, lots of people get scared of it. I know the studies have now debunked that wasn't what was causing breast cancer. It was the synthetic progestins and things like that. However, I think many people still worry about how much estrogen they should be taking. They worry about, I've heard people say, I get really terrible breast tenderness. Some people obviously have breast lumps that they're dealing with, which are benign, but then they worry about it. There's so many things, but it's also incredible for our bodies. Why don't we start with a lowdown on estrogen?
Yeah. I mean, it's the one that gets the most misunderstood out of all of our hormones. And it's even though women are starting to hear that, all about the DHEA study and it, how, what you just said, it was the progestins, which is, a lot of what's in birth control pills, was the culprit that minimally raised the risk of breast cancer by about 1 in every 1,000 women would have an increased risk of getting breast cancer from the fake progestin. And that the horse's estrogen replacement therapy, and that's a real key thing to hear, everyone, is this was the pregnant horse's estrogen showed, which is really, really strong. It's nothing like our own, but it did the job. It did the job so well. It was the #1 prescribed medication in the United States for several, in the 90s. The #1 most prescribed medication. So you can imagine how many women were on it and how well it was working to get rid of menopause symptoms.
The #1 medication, not just for women, but the #1. This is massive.
But by 1998, I think it was, or 97, it exceeded billions of dollars in sales. It's just crazy, how big that was, until the WHI study came out and said, hormone replacement therapy causes breast cancer, everybody get off of it. And then sales plummeted by about 70%. And we have not recovered from that. Even though the information is getting out there, you'd still be surprised at how many women, I would say 90% of our population of women are still going, estrogen causes breast cancer. And doctors, 99% of doctors, maybe not 9, we'll say 95, we'll give them 95. 95%, I would say, are still telling their patients, you can't have estrogen replacement therapy. It will cause breast cancer. I just had a woman come to me a couple weeks ago. She's 52. She has been bleeding every single day for 3 years.
Oh my God.
She has been to several gynecologists. She has been to a nurse practitioner, her primary physician. Every single one of them told her she cannot have hormone replacement therapy. And you know what they gave her? They gave her the exact same drug that increased and was used in the WHI study, which was medroxyprogesterone acetate. It's an implant that you put in your arm. It's birth control. That's what they gave her at 52.
Unbelievable.
And refused. They said, we can't give you hormones until you're in menopause. So this is so prevalent. That just blows my mind, because I always keep thinking, like, because I'm front lines in this industry, I keep thinking the word is getting out there. Like, everybody's talking about menopause.
Isn't that funny? So do I. You assume that everyone knows because you know, but it's still being readily prescribed. So that was a contraception at the age of 52, just like the birth control pill is prescribed to how many teenage girls, including myself, which then I think was linked with mental health problems later and the changes in the brain. You know, I love Dr. Sarah Hill's work on that. And yet it's still prescribed readily for non-birth control related
and
reasons.
These young women, 13-year-old girls, are like, oh, you can go on this. It's safe. You can be on it for extensive periods of time. No problem. Oh, you don't want to have acne? Oh, here you go. Here's your birth control. But God forbid we give a premenopausal woman bioidentical, which is what we have now available. We don't have to use horse's estrogen. We can use something that looks exactly like our own. And we're still refusing to prescribe it. And this is majority of doctors and even hormone doctors. There's a really popular online company, and I won't name names because I still feel like they're doing better for women than most. It's an online company where you literally take a quiz. And if on the quiz, they ask you, have you had a period in the last year? And if you say yes, this is a menopause clinic, online clinic. If you say yes to that, they recommend birth control pills, not hormones. If you say no, I haven't had a period, then they'll give you estrogen and progesterone bioidentical. But how do they think that that's okay? I mean, birth control pills, it's not just about the fact that it, like Sarah Hill says, like it shrinks parts of your brain. It like changes your chemistry. It causes, it increases your risk of breast cancer, clots, all of these horrible things. Destroys your gut microbiome, but we'll give you this because, oh my gosh, God forbid we give you your body's hormones back. Like a hormone that we've produced our entire fertile lives is suddenly dangerous in menopause. So it just makes no sense. It's like, doctors, just think about what you're saying. You're saying that a hormone that a woman produces her whole life in a huge abundance isn't safe until that woman is suffering so badly in menopause that, okay, then we'll give you some, but just enough to get rid of those outward symptoms like hot flashes or vaginal dryness, or, that's the, okay, we'll treat that. And that is not the way to go about it. The best thing that we can do to help us through menopause and stay as healthy as possible is to keep our brains intact, our hearts healthy, our bones healthy. We start losing bone like 10 years before we hit menopause, just from the loss of these hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And so we're telling women, you have to wait, when perimenopause is 10 plus years for most women. It's like, no, you can't have this. We'll give you an antidepressant. We'll give you birth control pills. We'll give you sleeping pills to manage these symptoms. Then once you're in menopause, we could give you estrogen, which would just fix everything, and it's like, it just drives me mad. it drives me mad. We now have a study that's going on right now. I don't know if you've talked about this. It's the 1 million study or 7 million study. It's like with 7 million people, but they took 1 million people, 1 million of those people they saw that were on hormones, basically different types of hormone replacement therapy. And they studied them, and they have the same results that the WHI study had. So they're seeing that women that are replacing estrogen have a lowered risk of like 24% lowered risk of getting breast cancer if they replace their estrogen. Like, that's mind blowing. So we've now repeated the results. So it's not just the WHI. We're seeing this again, that women that replace their hormones are better off typically on all fronts. We have a reduced risk of all-cause mortality by over 30%. We know that breast cancer is reduced, and like all cancers are reduced when you replace your hormones. The brain stays intact. Like we're so rich with estrogen receptors in our brain. We have to start thinking of menopause not just as a ovarian dysfunction, but it's as a brain issue, because we have so many receptors in our brain. We need estrogen to make serotonin. So for mental health, it's so important because we need that. It helps us with oxytocin, the love hormone. And so women can get depressed, and they start, even with sleep, sex drive. Women have a right to have sex in menopause and perimenopause. And they're basically telling us that we don't. Like, oh, this is natural. This is part of life. Suck it up. I've had women come to me crying, saying, I haven't had sex with my husband in 2 years because the last time I did, I tore. And I'm like, how is that even happening? How do we allow a woman to have this happen to her? If this was a guy's problem, Angela, could you imagine if at 45... Yeah, if a 45-year-old man comes into the doctor's office to say, oh, hey, doc, my penis is drying up. The skin's getting really thin. Every time I have sex, I tear and I can't get hard. And, like I'm getting fat and I can't think straight. And what do you think a doctor would be like? Oh, this is natural. Don't worry about it. Like, we'll give you an antidepressant, right? Yes. That's what we're being told, though.
I'll give you an antidepressant,
and it's like,
exactly.
Just lube up. It's okay. Like it's
but
just,
we would never.
Doctors,
unfortunately, also saying this. I had someone just the other day say to me that, she was struggling with vaginal dryness and sex, and it was really difficult. And the female doctor was like, oh yeah, same for me. That's just what happens in your 50s, because it's kind of like your body's saying you don't need to procreate anymore. And that's why. So forget ever having great sex again. And it's like, that can't.
Could you imagine if we said that to a man? It would never happen. We have testosterone clinics on every corner. And if a guy needs it drops even a little bit, it's like, oh my gosh, here's your testosterone, here's your Viagra. God forbid you can't have sex. And women, it's just like, oh, well, you can use some, lubricant and, and it's like women are saying, like, my vagina's closed, Karen, it atrophied so bad, like nothing's getting in there. Over 50% of women, Angela, have vagina atrophy or dryness in menopause and perimenopause. So it's not just this small number. It's half of us are getting this. And yet we're not being treated properly for it. And so there's so much out there that needs to be cleared up. And we really do need to keep spreading the word, because it's not getting out there. It's not trickling down. Doctors, less than 7% of doctors are even trained in menopause. Nobody's trained in perimenopause. And it's perimenopause that are that's where we're seeing the bulk of the symptoms. 85% of women are going to have symptoms in perimenopause. 25% are going to have severe symptoms. The highest rate of suicide for women, it's not called suicide, I don't think, anymore. I don't think that that's politically correct. But women take their lives. The most common age is between 45 and 62. You can't tell me that that's not a coincidence, that that's when we lose the bulk of our hormones. Estrogen specifically, that's when we lose estrogen the most. And that is the highest age rate of women taking their lives. That's so sad and so horrible.
Tragic. Yeah, and tragic. Yeah. Many of them mothers, right?
Women are quitting their jobs. Like it's,
yeah, it's tragic. I mean, and it's, I remember just recently speaking with a researcher here in the UK around the research that's going into why is there a resurgence of mental health symptoms as they approach menopause in women. But even things like ADHD diagnoses, if they haven't been diagnosed before, are higher. There's such a mental health link and cardiovascular link, right? But when you were talking there about the vaginal dryness, we haven't spoken a lot about that on the podcast. We've talked a little bit about topical estrogen. This is an issue, I think, for many women who feel like, nervous of speaking up about it and sort of admitting to it. And they feel it like it's something they've got to cope with, and having painful sex, and that they've just got to get on with it. What is available to them in terms of helping resolve that? And if there is atrophy, can they get it back?
They can. And same with, urinary tract infections go up because of the loss of estrogen as well. So there's, luckily in the United States, I don't know about the UK, but there's a lot of over-the-counter estrogens or DHEA that you can apply to the vagina tissue. Estriol, not in the UK. Yeah. So you would have to go to your doctor and you would have to ask for either an we love to use estriol suppositories for vaginal atrophy and dryness. They work so well. So does DHEA suppositories. Might be a little bit more challenging to get. I know it's challenging to get it here, the DHEA, but not in the States. So if you're in the States, you can get all of this over the counter, not the suppositories. We can get the creams that you can apply to the labia, which can really, really help. A lot of women use my cream. I have a Biest that has estradiol and estriol in it. And a lot of women are now using that actually in the vagina or on the labia, and they're finding it's really helping. I can't say that it's made for the vagina because it's not. So I have to let that, to each his own on that one. If that's what you want to do with it, go for it. But that can be extreme. Like it's so fast. It's really, really, really helps. And so if you can apply that daily, and if you're in the UK, you would ask your doctor for these suppositories or a cream, an estriol cream that you could put on the labia, could really help with that. And so I definitely recommend women to do that. It's not something they should ever have to put up with, because there's really good answers for it, really good solutions.
And what about sometimes younger women are struggling with vaginal dryness, in their early 30s? What do you think is the cause there?
Probably still something to do with their estrogen. Some women are just more prone to dryness. A lot of women nowadays too have issues around their sex drive. Like they don't have much of a sex drive. They don't get lubricated. They don't get turned on enough. This is environmental. It's also mental. There's many things that are going into this, but it's definitely on the rise. Unfortunately, birth control pills kill the sex drive. Antidepressants kill the sex drive, and these are things that a lot of women are on. There's just the toxic load, the xenoestrogens. There's so many reasons for this, and so if a woman's not being able to be turned on very much, she's not going to be lubricated, and so I would still recommend then, like, obviously working on the psychology piece, but working on like, what's your testosterone levels? What is your estrogen levels? Because both of those things can really impact sex drive as well as lubrication. So a woman in her 30s can have low testosterone, and she can have low estrogen, especially if she's been on birth control in the past. So you could still use it topically, and we don't tend to have to use very much, which is nice. So if somebody's younger, her estrogen looks good, but she's having vagina dryness, she could still use like the topical DHEA and estriol, and it won't, if you use it in how they say to use it, which is like 3 times a week, you're not going to raise levels systemically with that, right? Because it doesn't take very much. That's why they always say women that are post breast cancer can safely use vagina estrogen without raising levels systemically. Well, if that woman actually used a correct dose in a suppository daily, darn right, she's going to raise her systemic levels. But if she was only using a little bit, minimally 3 times a week, we don't see it raising levels systemically.
Interesting.
So there are options, and you would have to, everybody's different. But if it was a younger person that came to me with that problem, I'd obviously first address sex drive and any issues around sexual activity. If that was like, if she was like, no, I have a sex drive, I feel good, I don't have any hangups around sex, then I would look at her testosterone levels, her estrogen levels, and let's see what's going on. Could we bump these things up a little bit to help her? Could we just use it topically? Systemically, when we use estrogen, I find it's like it has too far down to go. Like, so if you're applying estradiol, for instance, on your arm because you're in perimenopause or menopause and you're experiencing vaginal dryness, then yes, you can use it on your arm, and I definitely suggest doing so, but it takes a while to get down and really get local in the tissue. So I like to do both. Like if you're suffering with that, we use it topically on the arms, but we also use it in a suppository form inside.
True.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned testosterone there. That's another thing, right? So, quite a few women I find are now aware of the benefits of testosterone. Can you share a bit more on that so women can understand? Because I think now we're like used to hearing a lot about progesterone and estrogen, maybe less so about testosterone.
Yeah. So testosterone, it is our most abundant hormone out of those three in our fertile years, or should be. So we produce a lot more testosterone than we do estrogen or progesterone. All of our estradiol in the ovaries is made from testosterone. It has to convert from testosterone to estradiol in the ovary for us to have estrogen. So it's a really, really important hormone for women. And we tend to forget about it. There is not even a testosterone HRT available for women in the United States or Canada. There's only one available for men. So we have to get it compounded. So there's no pharmaceutical company that's actually making an estrogen for women. I think they've just come out with one.
Testosterone for women.
Sorry, testosterone for women.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I think they're coming out with one in the UK or Australia somewhere. You guys have an androgel for women now. So, but we haven't seen it here in North America. So anyways, because we produce about 45% in the ovaries, and the rest of our testosterone is made through conversions of other hormones like DHEA, and then the adrenal system, right? So the adrenal system is going to be making the rest of it plus these conversions. So we actually find a lot of perimenopausal and menopausal women that hold on to their testosterone levels because they've got healthy adrenal systems and their body's doing this great job of converting. And so it's like, okay, even though the ovaries are shutting down, they still have adequate amounts of testosterone. They're lifting weights. They're doing things that help with the production of testosterone, like stress management. Great. But then this other half we're seeing really get depleted. And this can happen anytime in your 30s or 40s, I find, where you could start to lower that testosterone starts to go down. And when testosterone starts to go down, women can start to feel fatigued. There's been women that have been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, even though it's, a lowered testosterone. No, not for everybody, but that has happened. We've seen that happen where they're so tired and the doctor thinks they've got chronic fatigue syndrome, which is just like a blanket term for, I don't know why you're so tired, when it was the lack of testosterone. So it can really help with energy. It can help with depression. So if women are suddenly feeling like they're just feeling a little more down than they used to, and just like, oh, I just don't have my spunk anymore. Women that are in, high career jobs, running businesses like you and I, Angela, like we really depend on our testosterone. I always say it gives you your lady balls, and it really does. Women will be like, they'll get on testosterone and they're like, oh my God, I just feel like I can just do anything now. And I can just conquer. And it's like, yeah. And then they'll say, wow, is this what guys feel like all the time? Like suddenly I've got a sex drive. I'm like, I ain't taking people's shit no more. And I'm like, yeah, pretty much. Right. It's not fair.
I love it.
So it can help with many different things. It's really good for bone health, and we know that of course for muscle, to build muscle, which then helps with your metabolism and the processing of blood glucose, and so there's many benefits to the testosterone. What we do see a lot in our clinic is women get on testosterone replacement therapy. We optimize it so they have these great levels, which is typically done through injectable. Just so people know, we definitely have found that injectable works a lot better, and women will feel it more compared to cream. So cream is done on a daily basis. Injectables usually once or twice a week. You can do sub-Q, you can do intramuscular. Well, we see injectable raising levels a lot better than cream. And when you do injectable, it doesn't convert as quickly to what's called the dihydrotestosterone. Now, dihydrotestosterone is, you can think of it as the super testosterone, super masculine. Guys that have high DHT, they typically are bald with a lot of hair on their body. Women with PCOS have a high conversion of testosterone typically into dihydrotestosterone, which is where they start to get, like, women with PCOS will get facial hair and they'll have thinning on top of their head and oily skin and acne. And so this is that DHT coming up. And so what we see a lot in our clinic is women get optimized on their testosterone and they're like, I feel so good. I've got my sex drive back, can help with lubrication. They're like, yes, I'm building muscle. I feel awesome. And then they start sprouting chin hairs and they start losing the head on their hair on their
They're
head.
like, wait a minute, I felt like a man and that was amazing, but now I'm starting to look like a man. Not so good.
Exactly. And I always feel so bad for them. I'm like, oh, we feel so good the more kind of masculine we are, but then we have these terrible side effects. And so it's a conundrum. It's like, oh man, I feel so good, but this is happening.
It's like,
Oh, I've had women, poor women that have been like, I think my clitoris has grown. I think my labia is
really?
bigger. Yes. So they start like literally like growing a clitoris, I call it, because that can happen. Like your clitoris can start to grow. And it's like, okay, we're not trying to transition women to be men. Like we have to be careful.
Does that come with better orgasms though? Or
100%.
Okay.
Yes. I always tell women, like, you'll have better orgasms, more satisfactory. Same with estrogen. Estradiol specifically is really, really important for sex drive, almost more important, I'm finding, than testosterone. So a lot of women, they think, oh, I'm going to go on testosterone, I'm going to get my sex drive back. And they're like, oh, what happened? I still don't have it. You give them estrogen and they're like, there it is. And so it can be so great for better orgasms, of course, more lubrication, both of them, and better and just more wanting to have the sex. A lot of women, we just had this big talk in my group about it where women were like, how much are we really expected to have sex at this age? Like, I want to know what. So I'm going to do a whole podcast about that, like just kind of what I hear, because I talk to so many women of what's normal. We're being so pressured from the outside to have sex multiple times a week and have the sex drive that our male partners have. And they never line up. Very rarely do a woman and a man's sex drive line up. And so I think women just need to hear, like, hey, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. It's normal to have a lowered sex drive as you start to go into perimenopause and menopause, but it doesn't have to stay that way. There's so much that we can do
it
hormonally.
can get better again. Yeah.
And it can actually be the best sex of your life, because women, when we go through perimenopause and menopause, if we're addressing this hormonal loss and we're staying on top of it, these can be the best years. I see women just flourishing because it's like they're finally becoming who they really are. Their kids are getting older. They're not so dependent on mom anymore. And, you've kind of kept the partner, you kept the career now. Like, you've done all those things that were so important in your 20s and 30s. Now your 40s, 50s and beyond, it's like all about you. It's like, oh, well, what do I want? Who am I? And you start to demand more for yourself. And that can be in the bedroom as well. And so women can find that sex drive is better and sex life is better the older they get.
I feel like, Karen, you're almost on the wrong show here talking about this. I feel like actually, if you were to go and talk about this, we're always talking to women, and if you just went onto men's podcasts and started talking to them with like really big male listenerships about how incredible women's sex drive is, and there were all these benefits of hormone therapy, they'd be going along and taking their partners and saying, "This is going to change your life. This is amazing."
Yes. And I do. Every time I was just on Ben Greenfield's, and I've been on several male podcasts, and I do not hold back. I school them big time, because it's like, you guys need to know this. And they're all like, oh, like, it's so funny. They get all like red in the face. And I'm like, no, like, you need to hear this. Like, your wife's vagina is drying up right now. It's not comfortable. She does not want to have sex. She feels horrible. She's emotional. She's not sleeping. Like, you've got to address these hormones, and they start to go down. And, you know, you have to start to read your woman better. And like I school them on it.
That's so brilliant. I can't wait to listen to you on the Vengry Pub one. That's so funny. What about as well? Let's talk quickly about DHEA, because we were talking
Yep.
offline a little bit about this, and it's definitely something that, you know, I see when you look at people's Dutch tests, particularly when they're super, super stressed, that over time DHEA starts to go down, and obviously that affects muscle mass, it affects drive, so it's so many things.
Mm-hmm.
But as you've pointed out, it can be problematic in terms of actually taking DHEA. Can you elaborate a
Mm-hmm.
bit more on that?
Yeah. There's a lot of hormone doctors, naturopathic doctors, I find, that will say, like, oh, you can just take DHEA and it'll convert to testosterone or estrogen or whatever it is that you need. And then you don't need to take testosterone and estrogen. And I've been doing this now for 10 years. I have literally read probably over 1,000 different Dutch tests plus blood work. And I will tell you right now, I just don't see that happening. It does. It is like, when you look at the chain of events that happen with your hormones and what converts to what. It's like pregnenolone is another one that they say, oh, just take pregnenolone because it's the master hormone and it'll just go down and go to wherever it is that you need. It'll produce progesterone, it'll produce your cortisol, it'll do all these amazing things. We just don't see that happening. Those hormones to replace do feel good for a lot of people. Like, pregnenolone is great for the brain, and we know that DHEA can help with maintaining muscle tissue, helps with insulin resistance, or insulin sensitivity, I should say. It helps with that, helps to ward off the insulin resistance, can give women energy, and it supports the adrenal system. So there's a lot of benefits to it, but we just don't see it highly converting down. We typically need to get our estrogen to a certain level to get the health benefits from it that will protect our brain, bones, and heart. And DHEA will not convert down to that level. Like, we're talking, we want to see estradiol in when women are on HRT between 65 and 100 pgml. So that's, you know, where we see that they'll get the bone protection and ward off osteoarthritis, that they'll get the brain protection. Well, we can go into that later. All the brain stuff with estrogen. There's some really, really good studies on estrogen and brain right now that are just like, will blow your mind. But back to DHEA, it's an adrenal hormone. And so as women go through perimenopause and menopause, we tend to start to tax the adrenal system more so. And you'll hear it from women. I'm sure you do all the time, where it's like, what I used to be able to handle, I can't handle anymore. Right? Because the sex hormones are dropping. We've got progesterone that hits the road first, which is our calming, anti-anxiety hormone, helps us sleep. So now we're not sleeping as well. We've got anxiety, and that buffer to our stress is depleting rapidly. And it'll be gone by about 75% in your early 40s for most women. So that really should, like, poof. And so now we're like super sensitive to all this cortisol and stress. And we know that women nowadays are carrying more stress than ever before. We're trying to juggle so much. And then you start lacking in these really important sex hormones that are so important for our mental health. You just feel frazzled and you feel like, oh, I can't take anything anymore. Like, one bad night of sleep. We were talking before we started airing here about just traveling. Like, I used to travel the world in my 20s. No problem. Party my ass off everywhere I went, stay up all night and travel. Oh, I'll do a 17-hour flight to India. No problem. Now I'm like, oh my God, I just took a 5-hour flight. I got to recover for 2 weeks. I can't take it anymore. I'm just not that resilient. And so, yeah, I have to be really careful. And so DHEA, we see what it's an age-related hormone. So as we age, it naturally comes down anyways. But not only that, is if your cortisol is high, which a lot of women's is, the longer it remains high, your DHEA will typically go high too, because it's an adrenal hormone. It's going to get produced more because you're stressed out. But then it goes into this adrenal insufficiency where the body goes, yeah, no, we're going to downregulate DHEA now. and your DHEA will start to lower. And so the really common picture on Dutch test is a high cortisol with a low tanked DHEA. And we know that cortisol is very catabolic and DHEA is anabolic. So we want to boost up that DHEA, but just a little bit. A lot of doctors will be like, take 50 milligrams. And we see that being too much. Like women will start, because it's androgenic and it can convert down into that DHT eventually as well. So women will start to get acne and the oily skin and the hair loss. And so we like to do it in a minimal, like 5 to 10 milligram dosage. And we find that just takes the edge off and it can help with everything. It just kind of supports the adrenal system. Women tend to not be like, oh, wow, I really notice a huge difference with DHEA. I never hear that. Never. I found when I took it, mine was really low for a really long time. And when I started to take it, I did notice a bit of an energy boost, but that's it. And so most women don't notice this big, profound difference. Unlike women can get on estrogen and progesterone and be like 48 hours later, they're like, could it really be happening this fast that I feel this good? I'm like, yeah, it really can.
That's
So, but
amazing,
DHEA
isn't it?
isn't one of them.
Yeah, it's not that dramatic. And what about for like, I know in the States you can go and just buy DHEA. In the
Yes.
UK you can't. What are like natural ways that women can raise DHEA? Obviously reducing stress.
Reducing stress. It's the same. A lot of the same supplements used for testosterone can be used for DHEA as well. So things like Tongkat Ali, zinc, maca is great for DHEA production. But like I said, it is an age-related hormone. So a lot of these hormones, there's so much supplementation that we can do before that's not going to work anymore, because it's just a matter of my body's not going to produce it anymore, right? Like once the ovaries shut down, they shut down. So when people tell me like, oh, I'm just going to naturally get through this and I'm going to take supplementation and bioregulator peptides. I mean, I've heard it all. I've heard people say, I just have really good friendships and that seems to get me through menopause. And and I'm like, oh, geez, like that's not gonna, you can't biohack your way out of ovarian loss. And every woman has to get that through her head, because especially people that listen to your podcast, Angela, they're probably really health orientated people, right? They're taking care of themselves. And so a lot of them will get it in their head. I had it in my head. I'm like, I'm a weight loss coach. I'm a nutritionist. I'm all about the hormones. I'm going to sail through menopause. Like no problem. I had the worst time of my life when I hit it at 42. I started losing my hormones, started going into menopause. I had every symptom out under the sun. I almost gained 20 pounds in a matter of months. I was a complete wreck, and I had not drinking for 10 years. I ate a paleo-based diet. I was exercising, prioritizing protein. I was fasting. I did it all. And it hit me like a freight train. Like I was so, and then I was like, wow, it doesn't matter how healthy we are. We could still be hit and blindsided by these symptoms. And I really want everybody to hear that, because women will tend to think they can exercise their way out of it or diet their way out of this or have friendships that will get them out of it. Whatever it might be, you might not be that person, like all of those things help and they're all foundational, and we need to have those during this time more than ever. But don't beat yourself up if you get all of the symptoms and you feel horrible and you gain 20 pounds without changing a thing about your extremely healthy diet, because it can happen to us. And that's really important to hear, because women will be like, well, I'm not doing enough. I have to go work out harder. I got to take more supplements. It's like, no, you just have to replace the hormones, unfortunately, for some, right? I know some can't take hormones, and there is that very small subset of women that cannot do hormone replacement therapy, but majority can. And if you're suffering that much, don't sit there and try and muscle your way through it because you think you're going to get a badge of honor because you got through menopause without taking hormones. It's not how we need to approach this. We need to go, okay, what are my options here? What is the best, options as far as long-term health goes? There's no supplement out there that's going to reduce your risk of all-cause mortality by over 30%.
No.
HRT does.
which is amazing. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you said that. And I think related to that, which isn't really the topic of today's conversation, is how many people also feel bad that they think if I'm not taking care of my health, if I get sick, it's because I'm not taking care of my health. If I get one of the diseases that I don't want is because I'm not taking care of my health. And I actually think this is producing health anxiety and
Yep.
guilt and shame around our health, when actually, as you pointed out, particularly with perimenopause, you can be doing all of the right things and then shit still happens, right? And that can also happen with
Absolutely.
your health, and it is not your fault. Like, I really want women to hear that, and anyone listening to this podcast, right? It is not your fault. All we can do is take steps to improve our situation and then
Yeah.
forget. I always say to my kids, right, do your best and
Yeah.
forget the rest,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's nothing you can do about the rest, right? But I
There's
feel
even
like
like
there's a too much anxiety around it, if you see what I mean.
I'm really glad you said that too, because there's also a really very fast growing movement right now about somatic therapy and trauma and nervous system, and how there's this emotional trauma related to every chronic illness, and anything you have wrong with your health, it's because you have this unresolved trauma in your past, which absolutely can be true. I am totally one for mind body connection. It's there. But I used to beat myself up all the time. I had chronic migraines for the last 15 years, almost daily. And I would always be like, what's wrong? What emotionally have I not dealt with? And kept thinking that it
Mm.
was something like there's a root cause of trauma or whatever. And I always would think that with any health problem that came up. And one day I was like, but what if it's not? What if I'm just a human being in a human body that breaks down?
Mm-hmm.
Human bodies break down. We start
I'll
dying the
break
minute we're
down.
born. Like, right? Like, we are meant to break down. We're meant to age and die. And so that just like took so much relief off me. And it was like, oh, maybe this is just how my body's made. And this is what I've been dealt with. And I just, okay, I'm going to do the best I can to remedy it. And it allowed me to go and say, I'm going to take a medication every single day so that I don't have migraines. And that was a
Mm.
huge step for me
Gave you
to say
permission.
that, to gave myself permission, because I had tried to figure it out, the natural cause or the emotional cause, for 15 years, every single day, because I was suffering so badly. And I was like, I'm just going to take the medication.
Mm.
I'm done with this. I don't want, this is just who I am. And I don't want to keep digging and digging and digging and stressing myself out. And I'm just going to go, this is what I've been born with. I have genetics for migraines. I'm going to remedy it with medication. And it's
And
been
that's called
life-saving.
better. That's like better living through science. But you know what? And why wouldn't we use medication in combination with other things if it's suitable? But you know, there's a
Mm-hmm.
similar thing around mindset, right? And limiting beliefs. So if somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and now don't get me wrong, it's exactly the same, right? Some people have limiting beliefs that they need to overcome. Absolutely, they do. But in some cases, the only limiting belief you have is that maybe you have a limiting belief, right?
Exactly.
And you actually don't have
100%.
any. And then maybe you just haven't found that exact little tweak on your business that now makes it
Yes.
grow, and you're making loads of money. And
Yes.
so you keep going,
Yes.
oh my God, I must have limiting beliefs around money. I'm going to read every book on money because I must have a limiting belief.
Yes.
But the only limiting belief is the limiting belief that you have a limiting belief.
I did that for like 20 years. I was like, oh, my freaking dream board isn't good enough. Oh, I'm thinking too
Exactly.
many negative thoughts. I've got these limiting beliefs around money. And one day I was like, screw that. I'm not even going to listen to that shit anymore. It just stresses me out. And I let it all go. And lo and behold, my business took off anyways.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm so glad you verified that, because it's just that's the other
Yes.
one that I hear, right? And I think,
Yep.
and the other thing is around trauma, right? There's a very serious point, because everyone is also pushing psychedelics, which, by the way, I also think
Yes.
can be amazing. But I
Yes.
have been told, like in
Yes.
my case, with, very quite extensive mental health history, that it would be risky to take psychedelics and
Yes.
probably inadvisable, because I've now got to a situation. And I think that's the thing. I always issue it with a health warning whenever I interview someone around psychedelics, because it's not. I interviewed Matt Zaman, and I love his work, because he really, he says psychedelics. It was something that he says psychedelics are for everyone, but not for everyone. He says it, right?
Mhm,
But
mhm,
that's the point. They're not for everyone. And I think that's the thing
mhm.
to understand. And I think it's so easy when you're listening to a podcast going, oh my God, this must be me. This must be me. This must be my problem. And now you're in the car and you're like, this is me. This is my problem. I need to go and look at this. And then everything will be solved.
I've done
And
it
it's
a
not the
million
case.
times over. Yeah. Yeah. As we
That
age,
was
we
it.
get a
Sorry,
little bit
psychedelics
wiser.
for he's sorry to interrupt. He goes, psychedelics for everyone, but not everyone should take them. That was it. I wasn't quoting him quite
Great.
correctly. Yeah.
I appreciate
But
that a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Because it's like the new trend, right? And people are always like, oh, why don't you go do them? Like, why don't you go have I have friends that this is what they do for a living. And I'm like, oh, when I ask my body if it wants to go do ayahuasca or mushrooms, it's a hard no. It's like, don't you freaking dare. Like, no way. I have a big wall up that's saying, don't do that. And so I know I can't be, that's not for me. If one day it calls to me, I'll go do it. But right now, it would be a big mistake, I think.
Mm.
So yeah, you gotta ask yourself these things.
Ask yourself, is it right for you? Is this really
Yeah,
right for me? And is this really a
yeah,
problem for me? So I
exactly.
think
Yeah, yeah.
let's finish then on, well, two things, because I know we have to go. So one is quick touch on the brain, and then we can
Yes.
maybe close with the right time to start, to start hormone
Yes,
therapy.
because this ties into that. Like I was saying, estrogen, we start to lose our estrogen typically between the ages of 45 and 52. And then 52 is the average age of menopause, which is 1 year without a period. And so you'll start to, number one, gain weight. People think estrogen makes them gain weight, but I will tell you, I always say this, I'm like, the loss of estrogen makes you gain more weight than an excess of estrogen. It is the number one driving factor in weight gain in menopause and perimenopause. So women that have had slim bodies their whole life, never had to worry about it, they can suddenly pack on 15, 20 pounds in a year and just be like, what is happening? This is the loss of estrogen. We need estrogen to process blood glucose. We need estrogen to build muscle. We need estrogen for liver function. We have receptors for estrogen on every organ of our body. It's super important for our mitochondria health. It's super important for our immune system. It is the key hormone, you guys, like the number one that you have to be watching. Yes, we need progesterone always with it because estrogen it is a growth hormone. Progesterone will protect that and resist that growth in the breast tissue and the uterine lining. So we need progesterone. It's very important as well. But the effects of estradiol are so widespread in the body, and we don't want to wait till it's gone before we start replacing it, because so you're going to go 10 years with hot flashes and night sweats and low libido and vaginal dryness and foggy brain. You're going to have to quit. Some people have to quit their jobs, literally, because their brain cannot think anymore because of that loss of estrogen. And this can all happen before you're in menopause. So you watch your numbers. If you're in if you're in your early 40s, go and get your hormones checked. Look at what your estradiol is, and you watch it like a hawk. You watch to see if it starts to come down and if FSH starts to go up too. So if your FSH, follicular stimulating hormone, if it starts to go above 10 and your estradiol starts to go below 100 picograms per milliliter, that's your sign. And you're getting symptoms too. Watch it. And that's when you just put in a baby dose. Then you'll actually react better to the estrogen replacement therapy because you're not waiting for it to be totally gone. A lot of women that wait till menopause, they start estrogen replacement therapy. Doctors are giving them these high doses, like, oh, this is what you need. Here you go. Some doctors, a lot of doctors don't give enough, but here you go. And then women are like, I gained a bunch of weight and I'm getting water retentive and my boobs are tender and I'm got breakthrough bleeding now. And it's like, I don't like estrogen. And it's because they went so long without it. And then when it's given to them, it's too much for their bodies to process all at once. The receptors are down regulated because there wasn't estrogen floating around. And so you have to very gently get these receptors to come back up again. So you give it in smaller doses to start. And then women will tend to react better to it and get the benefits from it and not these side effects. And so if the earlier you start, as your estrogen drops, even if you're still having a cycle and you just put in that baby dose of estradiol, It can help to level things out because estrogen kind of 1 month it'll go up, the next it goes down. So it can help to level that roller coaster out a little bit and ward off those symptoms that come with the loss of estrogen, like weight gain, the meno belly, number one, right? Because we'll become more insulin resistant, cholesterol goes up. I see that across the board. Doesn't matter how healthy you are. Cholesterol starts to go up unless you replace your estradiol. That's how important it is.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very
You'll see the
interesting.
healthiest of women, like even my blood sugar went up a point when I started to lose my estrogen without changing anything. I'm always been a really healthy eater. And I was like, what is this? Like it
Right.
went from 4.5 to 5.4. And I was like, I'm like pre-insulin resistant. What the heck is going on? Estrogen loss. So we want
Thing
to
is,
be
we know all these
monitoring.
things, Karen, right? Because and you see all the research on this. What's so interesting for me about your story is that you were doing all of the right things. Do you know what I mean? And those things happened. I think that's what's so interesting about it. Because most people are not that compliant. So they're thinking, oh, yeah, okay, I'll go fix this. I'll go fix that. Do you know what I mean? Maybe I haven't been spot on with
Yes.
my diet and that's why I'm seeing this problem. But you were so spot on. And yet you still had that and 20-pound weight gain and everything else.
Yes. Yes. And I see it and hear it all the time. And it just breaks my heart because these women are beating themselves up and then they're taxing their system, which is the exact wrong thing to do. Like, oh, I'm going to intermittent fast more. Maybe I'll fast for 5 days a month and maybe I'll work out harder and I'll, take these supplements and I'll start cold plunging. And I'm like, oh my God, don't. Like, you're just trashing your system. That's not going to bring your ovarian function back. Like, we all have to get that through our head. And so if you're suffering, and even if you're not suffering, the women that don't get any outward symptoms, that's a problem too, because they say, well, I don't get any hot flashes. I don't have any, like my sex drive is still here. I feel fine in menopause. But what's going on the inside? We know 100% we start to lose bone. We know 100% it starts to affect brain function, liver function, gut function. So all of these things, heart function, that are behind the closed doors. And so it's almost a detriment if you don't have symptoms, because then you think, oh, I'll do just fine. And it's like, oh, but will you? Number one killer of women is heart disease.
If you're not checking
Right?
and you're not doing scans, or you're not doing DEXAs, you don't know your muscle mass, you don't know your bone. But you can see even looking at like faces, right? Our faces change because of that loss in bone density.
Yes.
That's an obvious place.
Even skin. So one of my products, I actually made it for the skin, and it's a higher concentrated dose of estriol and estradiol, because it shows in this one research where the women used it topically on their face for 6 months, and it showed a decrease in pore size at 6 months, from between 60 to 100% decrease in pore size. Wrinkle depth shrunk, collagen increased. So that just shows how important it is for your skin health, internally and externally. You can use it for skin health. That's why we start to we start to get saggy and thin skin and dry and wrinkly and the fine lines. That's the loss of our estrogen. Sore joints. We need the estrogen to help make the collagen. So it's the best anti-aging thing that you can do. Like, forget all the creams and everything, like the retinols and all that's great. Peptides, all of these things. I use them all on my face, but that is a game changer. And it's my biggest selling product. And people come back going, oh my gosh, I
need
can't
some of
believe
this
how much
product.
It's changed my skin. I'm sending you some, Angela.
I need
I
some of this
promise.
product. It's not often I say I need, but I feel the need now.
Yeah, it's a game changer. But the estrogen for the brain. So I'll just quickly say that there was a great study done where there's 3 group arms of the study. One arm of the study, the women weren't on any estrogen replacement therapy. One arm of the study, they were on 1 milligram. And the other arm, they were on 2 milligrams of estradiol. And this is estradiol, not estriol. Estradiol is the most important of the 3 estrogens. They looked at brain scans, and they saw that the women that were on 2 milligrams of estradiol a day, which is a pretty high dose for replacement therapy, their hippocampus part of their brain it grew in volume. So it volumized. The 1 milligram and the one without any estrogen, they saw 0 change in the hippocampus. When they removed that 2 milligrams of estradiol from those women, the brain went back down to its size previous. So it's volumizing parts of your brain. Like that to me is unbelievable. The other great study that was done was out of the University of Arizona in 2021. They had 400,000 women in the study. And it showed that women that replaced their estradiol for 6 years or longer had a 75 to 80% reduced rate of getting Alzheimer's and dementia. That is massive.
That's
For a
massive.
disease
That's
that can't be cured or can't be prevented. Like
It's
we know,
huge.
yes, it's type 3 diabetes, but estrogen helps with insulin sensitivity more than anything. Like it's so important for metabolic health. But
And also, right,
plus,
it isn't always type 3 diabetes, right? My mum has it.
yeah,
Her blood glucose
exactly.
is just fine. Do you know what I mean? Like there's
Exactly.
not. And this is the thing. Sometimes you have, and I've tested my genetics and I carry the gene. So it's like
Same.
sometimes, again, like you were saying, right, you can do the right things and you still get it. So this
Yes.
is
So it
amazing.
helps with the plaque on the brain. Progesterone helps with the myelin sheaths of the brain. Like we need these hormones, especially the estrogen, to ward off dementia and Alzheimer's. It has a massive impact. And we know that it is a growing issue in women. Like it's like number 4, I think, on the death for women. So and that's rapidly growing much farther than men's Alzheimer's and dementia
Much
rates.
bigger. Yeah.
And
I think
it's
it's like
just, we're
double the
living
risk.
longer than ever, right? So our brains are deteriorating because we're not getting the estrogen. And in our mother's era, they were all on estrogen. So I just think like, as we're coming up into this age, yeah, you got to really watch your estrogen levels for your brain health, period. Like that just goes to show. And it's not this baby tiny amount. Yes, we want to start with small amounts, but you really need to get your levels up to a proper amount in menopause, which means you may continue getting a little bit of a cycle for some women because it's enough estrogen that you still can grow a little bit of the uterine lining. Now, there's ways to kind of counterbalance that with progesterone. So if you don't want to have a bleed, you don't have to, but I think it's healthy to have a little bit of a period, even if you're in menopause, because it's a shedding, it's apoptosis, it's shedding of that uterine lining. And there's a lot of important things that go with that. So that's a whole nother podcast episode, but just like some women need to cycle their hormone therapy because there's a reason why we produce our hormones in the amounts that we do throughout the month. There's many things that are going on. It's not just about getting a period. We have a spike of estrogen on day 12 that upregulates a tumor suppressing gene. That's super important. It upregulates progesterone receptors. So we want to cycle for some women. That's when they get it the best. They feel their hormones the most, as if they try to mimic a little bit of what we naturally do when we're in our fertile years. Some women, they just static dose is fine for them too. But there's many ways. There's many ways.
It definitely sounds like a part 2. There's more.
Yeah. There's so much more.
There's so much more. We could
As
go
you can see, I don't
deeper.
have a problem talking about it.
No, I think
I get very.
I think you know so much about hormones that we could probably do another hour on it, but we'll do a part 2 and make it digestible if you're open to that for people.
Absolutely.
Karen, it's been so much fun. So much fun. We've left it too long. We mustn't leave it this long again.
I know, we won't.
Where can people find more about you, your creams? They're available in the US. I know you do consults, you have doctors on your team. There's so many ways. You have an incredible podcast. Please link. Please share. How can people connect with you?
Yes. So we can prescribe in every state in the United States. So if you are looking to work with someone with your HRT, you're welcome to reach out to us. We can also prescribe in BC and Alberta and Ontario and Canada. Unfortunately, nowhere in the UK, but we can still have coaching sessions with people from around the world. And then they can take those recommendations that we make and bring them to their primary physician, because most primary physicians are like, I don't know what to do. So if they have these recommendations from one of our nurse practitioners and they can say, hey, this is what I want to do, a lot of doctors will be like, okay, sure, we'll try it. Some are like, no way, but you can help. You can still get help with us. I also have a membership group, and we have people from the UK in the membership group. That's a really affordable way to get advice on your labs. We do lab readings every week for our members. You get all of this, like, it's kind of a functional program about how to address perimenopause and menopause. We go through all of the lifestyle factors that need to be in place, as well as all things hormone replacement therapy. So we give options for both non-hormone and hormonal. It's very extensive. It's been going for 6 years. So that's a really good place if you're in the UK and you just want to get that little bit of coaching on your labs. That's very affordable. We also have a weight loss peptide group for women, because weight gain is such a big issue for us in midlife. And sometimes you can replace all the hormones and be doing all the right things and you still don't lose weight. So we started a weight loss peptide group where we use tirzepatide and semaglutide and coach people through how to use them properly and safely, with maintaining their muscle tissue and all of the good things. And that's really been awesome. We've got like 200 and something people in that group too. So there's those. And then my podcast, the Hormone Solution Podcast, it's top 50 on iTunes. We've got well over 1 million downloads, over 350, I think, podcast episodes at this point. So tons of free content, of course, on there as well. And you'll be on there soon, so everybody can come and listen to our interview on my show.
Awesome. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Karen. And I think we definitely talked about things that haven't been spoken about before. And
good.
you are just a wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to coming on your show. It's going to be fun.
Yes.
And hopefully it won't be too long before we meet in person again.
Exactly. Well, thanks for having me.